Pilgrammed has a large variety of weapons. That's no surprise, given its status as an open-world RPG. Some are beloved, take the Rusty Bell and Azure Pinwheel for examples, and others not so much. And given the fact that this is my first video on this channel, which I want to primarily have be about Pilgrammed, I want to talk about my personal favorite, the Berried Cleaver. Before I talk about that though, I just want to say this is my first time trying to make an actually well-edited and scripted, interesting video for YouTube. So please let me know if I've done anything wrong or said something untrue, or just constructive criticism in general. Thank you. Now then, how do you actually get the Berried Cleaver? Well, the item was added in the Sweetberry Catacombs update, or version Maple if you want to get into the specifics, and is a drop from the Glutto enemy with a 5% chance. I personally think this makes the weapon pretty late game, as I find the Catacombs to be quite a challenge. Not at the same level as, say, Rifts, or I'm just bad. I'm probably just bad. Now, I don't really want to talk about how good the weapon is. I just don't want to make analysis videos on how viable or good weapons are. Both because I feel like there's more than enough people who talk about that already, and I've always preferred to just use weapons I enjoy rather than think are good. Well then, what makes this weapon different? It's the heavy attack. Of course it's the heavy attack. As you probably know, most basic melee weapons in Pilgrammed have a 3-hit combo, before having a bit of end lag. The Berried Cleaver is the same in this sense, the only difference being its 50% chance to apply the Berried status effect. Berried is a very interesting status effect, because it does nothing. It literally just does nothing. But, using the heavy attack of weapons that apply Berried will burst them, causing a small venom explosion that I actually don't know if it has any area of effect damage, but it removes the status and applies Venom 1 for 5 seconds. It will also deal the base damage of the weapon on explosion. I personally find that the Berried Cleaver actually utilizes this in the worst way in terms of raw damage. Twig Claws bursts the berries twice. The Rot has 3 different ways to burst berries and has a higher damage. So, how does the Berried Cleaver make up for this? Well, in 2 ways really. The first is the exclusive technique they added in the Raindrops update. Bash. Bash is a very simple technique. You bash forward with the handle of the cleaver. The damage is not great, being 75% of the base damage, which is 36. However, it has a really large chance to apply Berried, at 80%, and it also applies any end of melee combo effects, and applies slowness, making it really good for applying debuffs. But the real meat and potatoes is the heavy attack, where you will throw the cleaver forward and it will then get stuck in the enemy. It deals 150% of the weapon's base damage, which is actually not that bad. It also has a 100% chance to apply Berried, but this is not why you use the heavy. Use it on an enemy who already has Berried, not only for the 100% extra base damage, but the heavy cooldown just gets reset. You get to do it again, for another 150% damage. I think this is a really cool gameplay loop. While it is heavily RNG based if you get Berried or not, it's very fun and flows greatly. It also just feels really cool to use. Okay, so that's the weapon when it comes to usage. But there's more to go over here, because this weapon has a few interesting bugs. First and foremost, when you apply a gem to this weapon and then you use a heavy attack, the particles of the gem will stay on your hand where the weapon would have been, instead of where the actual weapon is. Also, if the player by any means goes invisible, the berries and moss on the weapon will also turn invisible. This bug occurred with the Rot too, but both of these have been patched. The wiki does not state anywhere that this was patched, but when I went to test this, the berries did not turn invisible. Maybe I'm just doing it wrong though. Well, that's the Berried Cleaver. I find this weapon status as being bad pretty sad. That rhymes. Especially when you consider that it is a rare drop from a relatively challenging enemy in a late game area and progression. However, just because this weapon cannot be used as some boss shredding high DPS build like many love, this suggests this weapon to me right now is basically just perfect. Pilgrammed builds, to me, usually fit into one of these 3 categories. Damage. These builds are by far the most common. They just dish out as much damage and shred as possible pretty much. Tank. I feel like these builds have 2 branches they can go down. Either the type where you simply do not care about dodging, blocking, or parrying, or more the type to protect other players. And last but not least, supports. Playing support in a game is always one of my favorite ways to play it. It just feels nice to help the team instead of just killing everything, but in Pilgrimmed there's a very, very little amount of ways to support. You slap on cleric armor, bloody tear, bloody chalice. Maybe I'm wrong here, I spend a lot of my time playing in a private server. But my point is that I don't really like any of these builds. I don't want to shred absolutely anything and everything. I don't really want to just take a bunch of damage without really dishing out much of my own. And I feel like I don't want to use a support build that just blends in with all the others. I really like how the Berried Cleaver meshes together. It gets to stack tons of debuffs with Mash, which can lower speed, defense, grant chip damage, and help players using Corroded Scalpel. Then you get to completely let loose with the heavy attack, which is even better if you combine it with things like Frost Cone. It also makes a very nice in-between role of being able to dish out damage and also generally lower stats to make it easier for other players. It's really fun to me, and that's just what a video game should be, fun. I think Pilgrammed is best when you as a player choose to do wacky shit instead of what's considered good. Say for example, instead of using Pink Gel Cartridge, Scrap Sickle, and Scrap Nail Gun, you could use the Scrap Shield, Scrap Longsword, and Elite Guard. It's more tanky than the other kinds of scrap builds, and it still kinda gets to have that same corrosion, but not at the same level. And it isn't optimal, but it's a good time. And that's really all I have to say. This is my first video, I don't want to make anything really big. But despite how frankly awful I am at it, Pilgrammed has been my favorite game ever since the Catacombs update. While I had played it prior to that, I didn't really see the appeal until I tried to run across the hallway at low health, get strangled to death by a me creep, and then, before I die, get killed by the jailer, all while my friend watches in horror. Well, I hope you enjoyed. Bye bye.